Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown podcast featuring PennLive Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh. We come on the air live on Facebook in a compressed week for the Steelers, and it's during this three-game gauntlet that's unprecedented in the period of time. Now, the Steelers did not get out of the gate well in Philadelphia. The much-hyped Pennsylvania Super Bowl was a debacle. And the 27-13 score was closer than the stats. I mean, 59 yards rushing, 11 plays in the entire second half for the Steelers. Time of possession around 20 minutes. I mean, this was terrible. You had Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown coming into that game squabbling about the passing game, but the remedy for all that strife for the Eagles was simply going down the field against Joey Porter Jr., so it seemed. I know he made some interesting comments to Nick that we'll get into later about the lack of flags against Brown. But it's just a defeating feeling when you're against a measuring stick of a team like the Eagles. But luckily, the loss really doesn't alter the trajectory for the Steelers and all the goals that this team wants, which is the AFC North crown and a home playoff game, are still on the table as the Steelers turn south to face the rival Ravens in a special Saturday evening game this Saturday in Baltimore. And that's where we look at this team, where there's a number of injuries headlined by T.J. Watt and, of course, George Pickens, who may or may not be in. He's been out for, 2 straight games now, and the offense looked pretty pathetic without him. But there were much more problems going on, Nick, and I loved what you said on Twitter, I think it was, where you just basically say the Steelers want to be a smash mouth team. But they went up against a real smash mouth team in the form of the Eagles, and their bigs were better than our bigs. And I think that's where the dust fell in that game. And if you explain that and give us an update, obviously, on the injuries, but also what problems that manifested themselves in that Eagles game could become chronic or even, exploitable by the Ravens down in Baltimore this Saturday, which with much more at stake than just this hyped Steelers, the Battle of the Keystone State or whatever that was. I mean, this is the real deal on Saturday. So, Nick, what are we facing?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's first start with the injuries. Today, they did a light walkthrough. Larry Ogunjobi's back out there. He missed last week with a groin injury. Pickens is listed as a DNP today, but he did run off to the side. He did do ladder drills. He went through things. It looks like they're gearing up for him to practice tomorrow. So I would say that the arrow is pointing up for George Pickens to play, which would obviously be very important for the Steelers. T.J. Watt did not practice, but he would have gotten today off anyways. He was walking around the locker room, no limp, no brace, no crutches, no boot, nothing. He's probably going to play. And then we'll see about Deshaun Elliott. We'll see about Dante Jackson. We'll see about Justin Fields. Those three guys are kind of up in the air. Dante Jackson has a pinched nerve in his lower back. I lean towards him being out. I think Elliott has a chance to play this week. I have no idea with Justin Fields with his abdominal injury. I don't know if that's what type of injury that is, if that's a muscle, whatever. But he was out there in sweats today. So really, when I look at the injuries, obviously that is the first big part of this, John. Steelers are just getting battered right now with injuries that they cannot afford. You talk about George Pickens. I mean, the one player on offense outside of Russell Wilson that they just cannot afford to lose. You just can't. T.J. Watt, the most important player that's, he's the straw that stirs the drink on defense. Deshaun Elliott, who has just been so good in the run defense, right? The secondary with him has been so good tackling in the open field. They lose him. You saw it in the run defense. You saw it in the open field tackling. They missed Deshaun Elliott. And so those three guys, to me, are just huge losses for the Steelers. So those three guys need to come back ASAP. Then we go to this Eagles game, man. And remember last Tuesday when I was talking about the run game being pretty much a product of volume. I think you saw that. Now, the toss plays after toss play after toss play. They ran 7 tosses. They ran the ball with their running backs 13 times. 7 of them were tosses. All of them were tosses under center out of 12 or 13 personnel. So they were very predictable. They were out of the same personnel groupings. They ran the ball just 3 times out of shotgun. They threw the ball 13 times out of shotgun. When they went under center, they ran the ball 12 times. They threw the ball 2 times. So, I mean, you look at the splits just from under center to shotgun, it basically told you if you were going to run or pass. First of all, that's not good. That's predictable play call. So I think one of the things that we saw exposed was I don't think this run game is good schematic. I think this run game, I think some of the issues obviously were offensive line related. I think there's still a young offensive line and they still have communication issues up front. But I think part of it is teams just really have a key in on what this run game looks like, and they fly downhill. And I don't think Arthur Smith is doing a very good job the last few weeks. I think he's better than Matt. I think everyone's comparing him to Matt Canada, and he's better than Matt Canada, but I think he is a very average offensive coordinator. I think that's what's being revealed. I don't think the Steelers match up against top coordinators in the league. You know, Vic Fangio, with what the Eagles are doing right now on defense, one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. Kellen Moore doing a very nice job on the Eagles offense. Same thing. I think the Steelers are at a coordinator disadvantage. So I think that's one of the issues we see revealed. I think Austin and Smith are very average offensive and defensive coordinators. And when they go up against top units like this, I think it really kind of shows itself. So I think schematically, I just think this run game's dead in the dust. I don't know what they're doing. They run way too much outside wide zone with Najee Harris. Jaylen Warren outsnaps Najee in this game, but doesn't even get half the touches Najee gets. I mean, Jaylen Warren has been so excellent. I think this is the other thing that really doesn't make sense to me about Arthur Smith, because there are games where you see it against Cincinnati or you see it against Washington, where he brings out wrinkles that really work well, and he calls great games. The second game against Cleveland, right? We came on here last week and said, wow, look at the adjustments he made from the first game to the second game against Cleveland. He learned. It just seems like sometimes he reverts back into bad habits. So you run these tosses, you run these predictable play calls out of the same personnel packages. When the Steelers go under center in 12 or 13 personnel, they run the ball 85% of the time. I mean, that is just too much of a tempo. You cannot tell defenses that you are running the ball that much. They run better out of shotgun, but they run more out of under center. You know, they kind of don't break tendency enough. And then there were 2 tendency breakers in this game, and they crushed the Eagles on defense and on offense in those 2 things. The flea flicker was the big play to Calvin Austin. That was a nice tendency breaker. And then there was a fake toss out of the gun that they hit Skowronek across the middle for about a 20-yard gain. I want to see more of that, because we have seen it. I've seen Arthur Smith do it. I don't know why he reverts back into some of these habits. You know, this Eagles defense schematically is very similar to the defense they faced with the Bengals. Now, the Bengals don't have the personnel that the Eagles do, but they run a lot of the same fronts and the same surfaces, and it just felt like the game plan from that game was completely thrown out the window. I don't feel like the Steelers featured Pat Freiermuth, Calvin Austin, Jaylen Warren, and Najee Harris in the correct ways without George Pickens. And I think without George Pickens, I think you look at the coordinating, and that becomes a bigger issue. I do think that they aren't quite good enough in the trenches yet. I think they're good enough on the defensive line. I just don't think they're good enough in the offensive line yet. I don't think they're there yet. Now, it's just going to take time. I think that's the heel to that. They just need time to develop up front. The Steelers feel like a team, John, that is in a transitional year. This team is clearly better than the 21, 22, 23 iterations. I think it's better than the 2020 version, too. I think it's the best team they've had since 2018. This is the best team they've had since Ben tore his elbow ligaments in 2019. Okay. I think that is true. But when I was talking about they want to be the bully, you saw what they want to be. The Eagles are what the Steelers want to be. They want to be that team that smash mouth football, goes down the field, has a 10-minute drive to end the game. They love that, right? They can't do that quite yet. They're growing into it, but there's still holes on this football team. They need a receiver. They pretty clearly need cornerback help. I think that's emerging as a huge need this offseason. Those 2 Those two areas of their roster are significant detriments. But they're better because why? They have better quarterback play. Russell Wilson's still giving them solid quarterback play. They have better coordinators this year. Even if they're not top flight coordinators, they are better coordinators. But they lack in some of the talent departments. They don't have the wide receivers to win. They still probably need two corners, honestly. They don't just need one. They probably need two corners. And in this game specifically, I mean, what a brutal game from the secondary and linebackers. I mean, the Steelers linebackers, they can't do anything else there. They paid Patrick Queen, Landon Roberts, they paid him in free agency. They drafted Peyton Wilson. All three of those guys put absolute stinkers on the field on Sunday. It just happens. It just happens sometimes. They can't do anything about it in that respect. But Joey Porter Jr., I thought had an up and down day. I think people are getting a little bit too hard on him. I think Dante Jackson really struggled before leaving. James Pierre didn't play very well. KZ and replacing Schematic struggled. Minka in the box, kind of what you thought it would look like. They struggled in the back seven significantly in this game. The D line actually played really well against probably what is the best offensive line in football. And when you saw the lull in the Eagles offense when the Steelers clawed back in that second quarter to make it 17-13 and a half, a big part of that was TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton just dominating up front. So I thought that was promising. I think that's why the Steelers have real shot in any game that they play in. But I thought you saw them get bullied around up front. I thought you saw them get bullied around in the passing game. I just don't think the secondary is good enough. I just don't. I know people. I see a lot of analysis, national analysts talk about the run defense, and I get it. The run defense at times can be a little leaky, but let's be real here. It's the Steelers' secondary that's really killing them in a lot of these areas. The Steelers' run defense doesn't allow a lot of explosive plays. Sometimes they allow 4 or 5 yards, which is a successful run, but they're able to generally kind of clamp down in, second and 10, first and 10, and force teams to pass the football. But how many missed tackles do they have in space by corners, linebackers, or safeties? So many of them. How many times Dante Jackson missed one, Patrick Queen missed one, KZ missed one. I think if you put Jackson, KZ, Queen, and Porter on anybody, they missed tackles in this game. It was truly abhorrent, the tackling. And that hasn't been an issue for them this year. They came into this game having the fewest missed tackles in the NFL. And then they had 20 missed tackles in this game. That is the most I can remember ever seeing from a Steelers team. It was truly historically bad. In fact, that is the third worst performance by any team in the NFL this year in terms of missed tackles. Again, complete outlier of a game for the Steelers. They've generally been very good at tackling, but they were not in this game. But the secondary is just an issue for the Steelers. They do not have the change-ups necessary schematically. I think this is where you can give Terrell Austin a little grace. They tried. They really tried to run a lot of different things. They tried to run man coverage. They could not run man coverage. This team could not cover man-to-man. Joey Porter Jr. is the only guy that they can trust to hold up man-to-man in the corner room. And I thought, A.J. Brown had one nice catch on him, which is where the push-off is what he's complaining about came on that one. But I thought he did a fine job outside of that. A lot of A.J. Brown's production actually came against Jackson or, in zones and stuff like that. And so this Steelers team, I think, had three of its biggest issues really come to a head, which was the run game. They want to be a running team, and they're really not that good at running the football. The coordinators are just average, and when they face elite coordinators like they will in the playoffs, it shows. And then three, I think the secondary is the fatal flaw of this defense. This defense is the highest paid defense in the NFL, but all of that is in the front seven. In the back four, they just have Minka, really. And so this is where, we're not going to talk about offseason yet, but this is the offseason where they got to stop adding these piecemeal cornerbacks, Stop bringing in, patches like Levi Wallace and Patrick Peterson. Jackson's been better than both of them, but he struggled at times this year and been injured a lot. This is the offseason where you flood that position and say, you know what? We're going to do what we did at cornerback to what we did at offensive line this year. We're going to draft an outside corner. We're going to draft a slot corner. You're going to bring in guys, and you're going to fix that position once and for all. Same thing at wide receiver, right? Okay, you have George Pickens and you have Calvin Austin. You're going to maybe make a run at T. Higgins. You're maybe going to make a run at Chris Godwin. You're going to make a run at one of those guys. And you're going to draft another guy. And you're just going to flood these two positions because they are so clearly the two biggest issues on your roster. So that's kind of, I think, just a little preview of what the offseason is going to look like. So I think your needs are clear. I think it showed that this team is a good team, John. It's a playoff team. It's a team that can win the division. I do not believe it is a Super Bowl contending team because you see what happens here in games like this. And so, yeah, I think, they are in a transitional year where they went from a team that really shouldn't have been in the playoffs last year and they were going to get crushed by the Bills anyways, to a team that, okay, now they can actually fight with them, but they're probably not going to string together 3-4 straight wins to hoist the Lombardi. But next year, maybe we can see that, and maybe we can see the manifestation of that. But they're just not ready yet. It was a good measuring stick to see how legit they were. They're just not ready quite yet. They're not quite there.
And I do agree with you when you say, well, what are the Steelers building? And it is a team like the Eagles that are built like the Eagles. And it's no coincidence that the assistant GM for the Steelers, Andy Weald, was the assistant GM with the Eagles. And he likes to build, the lines up front, build with the big bodies. Now, all that said, I would have loved to have seen the alternate version of this game had not Najee Harris taken his eyes off of that ball on that one toss in the second half and fumbled the ball when the Steelers were moving the football and had a chance to tie it up. That would have just been an interesting. To me, that's where the fork in the road was, where sort of all hope was lost. But it would have been interesting to see what kind of game would have unfolded if he gets that ball and he runs and they continue that drive. Any thoughts on that one there?
Yeah, I mean, you make an interesting point because for all the things I just talked about, the Steelers weren't really completely out of this game, right? They did force 2 first-half turnovers. Jalen Hurts fumbled the ball, and then obviously the punt fumble. And the Steelers' offense squandered that. Steelers' offense is just not there yet. They're an average unit, and when losing George Pickens has been an absolute death blow to this offense. We've talked about all offseason, John, how many times did we talk about wide receivers? I mean, I think you're just seeing the outcome of what happens. We said if they ever lose George Pickens, they're in trouble, and you're kind of seeing what the passing game looks like. And I think the fact that they can't run the ball really, really hurts the offense. If they could run the ball at a high level, even without Pickens, you could keep afloat a little bit better. The fact that they can't consistently, efficiently run the football is a significant thing because the passing game has been way better than we thought it would be because they get explosives and they're able to throw the ball way better. But without Pickens, it's just not been there. And so I think they need him back. But you look at their metrics without George Pickens in the offense. I mean, they are bottom 5 in success rate, EPA per play, yards per pass, explosive play rate, yards per game. I don't love using yards per game, but that's over the last 2 games. But all those rate stats on a down-to-down basis, they are bottom 5 in the league without George Pickens as an offense on the field. And so it is clear as day just how much they miss George Pickens. When he is back, this offense will get much better. And so you're not going to have the offense that, played the Eagles. But they were close, but they squandered opportunities that were gifted to them by the defense, which is huge, right? They start at the 45-yard line and punt. And that's not great. You start inside the Eagles' 10-yard line, and you have a nice play, and then you get dinged for 2 15-yard penalties, and you're back to, second and long. Steelers cannot win from second and long. They just can't. I think there's an argument the referees blew that call, but even still, Darnell Washington, I love the physicality, but you do not need to block the man all the way to the retaining wall. Would have been for second and 3 at the 4-yard line. I mean, that's almost certainly going to be a touchdown.
I think he just wanted one of those fans' beers that were sitting there. I think he was trying to grab a beer.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but, could have been that. Reminded you almost of the Pickens-Newsome brawl from the Browns game in Cleveland. I mean, just There were opportunities. How many missed tackles, right? We talked about that. Third down, they have them 3rd and 8. Oh, they dump it off in the flat. Wrap them up, punt. Wrap them up, field goal. Could have definitely kept the Eagles at bay more than a few times if they had just tackled in space.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many times. And as you mentioned, the Najee Harris one is even more striking to me because when I look at that, I say, oh, big play to Calvin Austin. Then they had gotten another first down. They were at the 26-yard line. I mean, they were driving. They were going.
Yeah.
They scored the touchdown there. It's 20-20, and it's a game. Even though the Steelers had clearly been outplayed, the Steelers' formula had kind of been working to a degree, right? They had gotten splash plays. The defense had settled down a little bit, and then I also thought the other thing that we maybe don't mention enough was Tomlin in this game. I do think there were 2 instances where I particularly looked at Mike Tomlin and I said, "What are you doing?" The first was at the end of the half. So the Steelers at this point are actually kind of dominating the Eagles offense. Remember, the Eagles offense gets off to a very hot start. They go up to 17-3 real quick. And they were threatening to go worse, but then TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward, all these guys take over the game. And so Mike Tomlin calls his first time out before the 2-minute warning, then lets it run down. TJ Watt gets a sack the first play after the 2-minute warning. Eagles are going to punt. He lets 30 seconds run off the clock and then calls the timeout. First of all, makes no sense, right? And Mike Tomlin said after the game he got caught up in some information. I don't know if that means he lost track. The guy that was, managing is in charge of clock management screwed it up. I don't know what, but either way, horrible process. Potentially cost the Steelers points. The Steelers got a bad punt off that too. They started at the 50-yard line, ended up getting, I think, to the 34, but had to rush, and Russ got sacked because it was a rush play, and Broderick Jones wasn't ready. And so you have, 26 more seconds, which is what I think it exactly was, if they'd call a timeout on the time. I mean, you don't have to rush. You don't have to do any of that. Potentially that's a touchdown instead of 3. That's significant. And then the second one was, I understand why he punts with 10:56 left in the fourth quarter. Steelers obviously never get the ball back after this, but it's 4th and 7 from the Eagles' 46. You're down 14. Playing field position game, I just don't think is a smart decision in this game because the Steelers started with good field position most of the game, right? The turnovers. They had 2 turnovers in Philadelphia territory and scored a combined 3 points out of it. They had that bad punt and settled for a field goal. So the field position game hadn't won them anything all day. And so I would have rather gone for it. I thought that was kind of waving the white flag almost, and obviously it kind of was because the Steelers defense couldn't stop it. So I think Mike Tomlin kind of lost the margins a little bit too with his aggressiveness and clock management at times in this game as well. And so there was just a conglomeration of things that came together where even though the Steelers on the stat sheet are so thoroughly outclassed, they really hurt themselves a lot in this game and had a chance to actually win this one. So you look back on and say, well, there were definitely chances for the Steelers to stay in this game and win it. And they kind of fell on their face at times.
Hey, great points about Mike Tomlin, because the one interesting thing as a result of the Hard Knocks and all the behind-the-scenes glimpses of Tomlin with his coaches and players, and he has gotten a lot of accolades and a lot of reevaluation of some of the Yinzer Tomlin critics. He's been getting good reviews for his these Hard Knocks glimpses that we're getting of him. But this clunker in Philly definitely brought out the Tomlin haters in force. I mean, I heard it all day Monday at the YMCA and, in the steam room, and that, those guys were just the diehard Tomlin haters that say, we're never going to win a Super Bowl with Tomlin. So, they're back out in force.
I know a lot of people were mad at the defensive game plan that, he probably helped devise too. And I thought the offensive game plan, we were talking coordinators. I thought specifically the offensive game plan was an absolute disaster. I thought Arthur Smith in this one, complete F grade from me. I mean, I didn't understand the thought process. I thought Austin's process was fine. I just think, so when, you were talking about flaws that were exposed, I think a personnel issue was exposed in this one. Again, I just don't think they have the players in the secondary, John, because think about it here. I'll read you some stats, John. When Jalen Hurts faced man coverage, they were 8 of 10, for 113 yards and a touchdown. When Austin blitzed them, they were 8 of 11 for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Steelers, when they were in too high coverage, missed 7 tackles, but the average depth of target was 1.9 yards. In other words, what I'm trying to say is the Steelers had figured out a formula. They went into too high, and they were able to win with 4. They were able to get at Jalen Hurts, and they were able to kind of slow down Saquon, right? Saquon didn't kill them. He only had 68 yards. He played 61% of the snaps. But the run game for the Eagles didn't kill them in this game. What did kill them was the fact they couldn't tackle. TA kind of found a way to slow down the Eagles, which was rely on his defensive line talent, go in too high and say, okay, go and tackle. And the Steelers just didn't tackle. They couldn't play in man-to-man. They couldn't play, so they couldn't blitz, really, because they couldn't play in man-to-man. And so all these things really came up. They centered it around stopping Saquon. They largely did that. Jalen Hurts did beat them because they didn't have the cornerback talent necessary to match up with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. And I think that's the story of the game on the defensive side of the football. On the offensive side of the football, I think it's much more complicated, as we kind of talked about, with, I think, being a lot of coordinators things, the O-line not being quite ready, and then missing George Pickens. I thought just a conglomeration of mess right there.
So turning to the big game in Baltimore this Saturday, do these problems open the door for the Ravens to redeem the loss that they suffered in Pittsburgh? Going into that game, the Steelers were, offense seemed to be firing, and everybody was talking about a shootout. Now, clearly in this game, with Pickens still a question mark, the Steelers are going to try to keep it close and win it at the end, which is usually what the formula they like. But are the Ravens going to be able to exploit that secondary as Hurts did? And is this offense going to see any better production than what they saw against the Eagles? I mean, how does this game? Because this game really is of the two, the most of all the games left. This is the most important game left.
Yeah, I mean, just like how we talked about last week, the Steelers can't go to Philadelphia and win.
Right.
Like the Ravens can't beat the Steelers. It's just something that they haven't been able to do. The Steelers have unique defensive talent to slow down the Ravens offensively. And that is kind of what the mess is, right? The Steelers are able to drag the Ravens into the mud, and they're able to make a few more plays. They're able to make that one pick. They're able to force that one fumble. They're able to make that one big throw. That's just been what it has been. So many of these games finish in one possession, so the Steelers just make more plays on the margin than the Ravens. Now, you look at this game on paper, and like I said before the first game, John, the Ravens should win. On paper, they're the better football team. But the Steelers have strategic kind of advances on the Ravens, with their defensive line. So I think you need TJ Watt to play, first of all.
Right.
And I think you need to hit explosive plays every now and then. Steelers' offense in this first matchup was pretty brutal. Their first matchup in Pittsburgh was nothing of an offensive masterpiece from Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson had 205 yards on 36 attempts and a pick. They ran the ball They ran the well at a high volume, but they actually were able to run the football well and sustain drives. With George Pickens, 8 catches for 89 yards, by far the leading receiver in that game. 12 targets. So they need George Pickens too. Pickens was the lifeblood of the offense in that game, and they were able to just drive enough. And remember, Boswell was able to kind of hit 6 field goals. Tucker missed 2, and that was the difference in the game, right? And so, really, when you look at it, you say, can the Steelers slow down Lamar and Derrick Henry like they did last time? Because Lamar only had 207 yards with a pick and a touchdown. Derrick Henry only ran the ball 13 times. Why? Because the Steelers got out to a pretty early jump start. They got out to a 6-0 lead. The Ravens then took the lead 7-6. Steelers took the lead before half, and the Steelers kind of just kept grinding at it. And the Ravens threw the ball 33 times while rushing at only 19. I wonder if they're gonna run the ball a little more. It would make sense to me to try and get Derrick Henry going, because he had 13 carries for 65 yards. So that's 5 yards per carry. But the Steelers kind of had a really good plan of how to slow this team down, and they kind of know how to tick Lamar off. And we'll see if Lamar can break that. We'll see if they can break tendency. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. Can they not get dragged into the mud? I think, the Ravens have proven incapable of that so far. And so that's going to be the big thing. But this Ravens defense, kind of starting with that Steelers game, John, has really turned itself around. It's a much better Ravens defense. Remember when we were talking about it the first time, they were the worst team against the pass.
Yeah.
Well, since that time, against the Steelers, they've held the Chargers to 23 points and just 218 yards passing. They faced the Eagles. Jalen Hurts had just 118 yards passing, and they faced the Giants here. They had just 191 yards passing. So since that first game against the Steelers, they are the third best pass defense in the NFL. That is a huge flip on their head, of course, of the metric that we had previously. So they have gone all the way from 31st to 17th in 4 weeks. That is impressive. 4 games. I think it's 5 weeks specifically. So the Steelers, struggled to pass the football last time. Can they do it a little bit better this time? They're going to have to do it a little bit better this time. They're going to have to get someone else involved. Even if Pickens plays, they're going to have to hit a big play to Austin. They're going to have to find someone else to make big plays, or they're going to have to run the ball better. And so that's going to be the key thing in this game for Pittsburgh. And so on paper, as you mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, John, I just think the Ravens matchup, talent for talent, I think they should win. But as we know, I think the Steelers kind of have game plan specific things, matchup specific things that they're able to exploit. And I think the Steelers are better up front on the defensive side of the ball specifically. I just do not believe in this Ravens offensive line like that. That is what the Steelers exploited last time, and they were able to get after Lamar. So if they can do that again, the Steelers can absolutely win this game. And because it's a divisional game, these teams know each other inside out. The Ravens are going to be motivated to try and win this one. This is only the second time, believe this or not, John, this is only the second time the Steelers have faced Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. The second time.
Wow.
It's crazy. That's a crazy stat, but we'll see how that looks. But the Steelers, it's been kind of crazy. The Steelers' House of Horrors has been in Cleveland, but they have kind of enjoyed themselves in Baltimore. They've been able to win in Baltimore, and so we'll see if they can do it. Obviously, the trends recently have gone towards the Steelers, but I think the Ravens are the more talented group right now just because the Steelers are so banged up and everything, with all the questions around Pickens and Elliott and Watt. It does bring some questions about, can the Steelers really execute the same game plan without those guys? I think there's a lot of questions about that.
Well, given that, and I agree with you, those are the 3 injuries that we got to track. Give us some signposts up ahead when we're going to know about these guys and their availability for this Saturday night game rather than a Sunday game. So they have one less day to sort of get themselves right. So give us the signposts to look for on those guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to probably see, I would imagine, if Pickens can get in tomorrow, if we can get Watt in tomorrow, if you can get all those guys in tomorrow, I think that would be important. So I think, with hamstring injuries specifically, guys like Elliott and Pickens, you're going to want to see that limited participation tomorrow.
Okay.
Just because it is an injury that typically needs to be tested out over multiple days. So if I'm the Steelers right now, I am looking at saying, can we get these guys on the field tomorrow? If not, I think the arrow is pointing down. We'll see. But I think tomorrow is going to be the big day. And obviously Thursday you'll figure out what happens. If none of them are out there anytime this week, they're just going to be out. But I think if you see the guys out there tomorrow, even in limited capacity, those are good signs that they can play.
Okay, that's what we're going to be looking for because we got the short week, we got the big game in Baltimore, we got the first round of the college football play. This is a huge football weekend, so there's going to be a lot to watch and to bite your fingernails over. And of course, then we're coming up on an even shorter week when the Steelers play on Wednesday at home on Christmas Day. And as a result, we're going to announce 2 special editions of the Steelers Breakdown podcast. They're both going to be on Monday of next week. So with the Wednesday game, we're going to do the podcast Monday afternoon on Christmas week, and we're going to do it Monday afternoon following the Christmas game ahead of New Year's. So the next 2 weeks, we're going to be on Monday afternoon. So look for that, but look for the big game in Baltimore, and go Steelers.